It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in the control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day and welcome, listeners, to the Two Jacks. It's episode 30 of our combination episodes. I think we've done a couple of hundred of these, Jack, but this is what we, this particular podcast that we've done 30 episodes of now, or coming on the 30th, is where we look at things around the world and come back to Australia in our combination Australia and the World podcast. Joining me, as usual, is Hong Kong Jack. G'day, mate. How are you?
G'day. I'm well.
And how are things in Hong Kong? There's been a few arrests over a bit of match fixing, Jack.
There has. I think about 23 people, including a coach and 11 players from First Division football here in Hong Kong. Now, you've got to bear in mind, there is a Hong Kong Premier League above that. So it's sort of semi-pro, you know, a bit above park football. Have been arrested because apparently there is an illegal betting going on these matches, and the fix was in.
The fix was in, and we've seen this in lower level soccer a fair bit. In Australia, there was a match fixing exercise put together by a Victorian Soccer League team, not at the top echelons, but at the lower echelons. Can you imagine having a bet on a game of basically park football?
You can walk into the Jockey Club here on a weekend, the Jockey Club being the betting agency. We only have one legal betting medium in Hong Kong, which is run by the Hong Kong Jockey Club. And you will find bunches of guys sitting around watching a telecast of, say, the Mariners, the Central Coast Mariners, playing, I don't know, the Adelaide
Wellington,
team.
whatever it is, yeah.
And I can tell you, none of the people watching it would be able to find Gosford on a map, and they're betting up big on a Australian soccer match. So they'll bet on anything. It's fair to say, not just in Hong Kong, but in around a fair bit of Asia. So if you can fix what's really a minor match somewhere, you can be in the money.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So at the top level, it's a lot harder to do to get people involved in match fixing. I mean, we don't need to go all the way to Premier League, but where players are being paid, $500,000 a week, they're not likely to be bribed. But when we get down to the smaller efforts, and I'm not going to even put in the A-League in there, you might be talking about the Central Coast Mariners and others. But when we get into the lower leagues, that's when these things can happen, because it's very easy to bribe players who are not earning a lot of money.
The bribe levels, some of the players were being paid up to 10,000 Hong Kong dollars a match. That's 2,000 Aussie.
It's not much, is it? It's not much. And the penalties that are coming their way, that may come their way, we've only got charges being laid at this stage, but the penalties coming their way means they won't be playing soccer. Their chosen football code for a very, very long time, if ever again.
Unless they're playing in the side out at Stanley Jail.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, it's just a constant reminder that sport, particularly at the lower levels, can be fixed quite easily. And I suspect the bookies would be sitting in a hotel room with their very own servers and offering prices all over the place from hotel rooms that they can quickly escape from if the wallopers are on their way. Somewhere in Southeast Asia, I would suspect, Jack, in a hotel in Southeast Asia with a lot of computer equipment and a lot of screens. Now, Jack, we're going to move to Australia straight away today. The PricewaterhouseCoopers business, Jack, they were advising the Federal Treasury on tax minimisation from global big major global companies, and as a result of that, Joe Hockey put together some anti-tax avoidance legislation in 2015, and then the PwC went out to their clients and told them how best to get around it.
So,
and Joe Hockey was said to be frustrated and angry, Jack. Have you seen Joe lately? He dresses like he's 35.
Does he? Oh, well, he has lived in America for quite some time. And
he's got a consultancy in, I think, New York City.
But if you go to America, you find people who are older than me dressed like skater boys.
Yeah, he's got a little bit of that. I did come across an interview with him on the NHL. He was getting behind the Washington Capitals when he was Australia's ambassador to the United States. Didn't know a whole lot about hockey, did Joe? But is this a fault of legislation, or is this a broken system where the bureaucracy is basically being swept aside?
I read something the other day, they dated it back to the Howard years, but I actually think it goes back to the Whitlam years. When the Whitlam government came in, some of the incoming ministers were distrustful of the public service because they had been serving a Liberal government for 23 years. And there was a move to, not to politicise the public service, but to place outsiders in senior positions within the public service. And that's grown government by government by government, so that we've lost a little bit of the benefit of having the Sir Humphrey types, the independent civil servant who's going to survive whatever happens to the government, to the political government of the day. We've lost a little bit of that. And I think that has been a loss.
I think Keating was elected in 1974 in the double dissolution election in 1974. And his first job as a backbencher was to contact all of the heads of departments and join them and meet them to find out how the whole system worked. And he showed probably more acumen and desire to find out than any backbencher before or since. But now it seems to be, and that was going all the way back to 1974, but now it seems to be, which consultancy firm do you know? I mean, it staggers me. It just seems to be inbuilt costs here for the Australian taxpayer, for the Australian people, that whenever for example, there is a census organised, we always have to have censuses, I think every 5 years. And then if you look at the expenditure along the line, there will be a consultancy firm sought to provide advice so that the bureaucracy and the government can in turn seek an IT company to perform the work. And all the way through there's a lot of money being spent that really seems unnecessary.
Doing stuff that once upon a time was done by the public service itself.
So this is a consequence of stripping back the public service?
No, of allowing the public service to outsource part of the work. I mean, these are not generally political decisions to call in a consultant. These are decisions made within the public sector itself.
Yeah, okay. I just see, like if you were going to get into government, Jack, if you wanted to just get involved in the business of decision-making at the highest level, coming in as a consultant is going to be very, very lucrative, isn't it?
I've got to confess that I've done a couple of short-term gigs within the New South Wales State Public Service, brought in as a consultant to fix relatively minor problems.
Yeah, and quite lucrative. You can happily charge them a couple of $100 an hour.
No comment.
Well, we are going to have to seek your comment on the Higgins-Lehrman inquiry. Firstly, let me say a wholehearted congratulations to Stephen Ricey at the Australian and Janet L. Brexton, who have followed this story very, very closely. And it is looking more and more like we have a serious clash between the Crown Prosecutor and police. Police gave their first lot of evidence yesterday, and the officer involved at a senior level said that there was a very low threshold for prosecution in terms of what the police thought, but the prosecutor, the ACT public prosecutor, Mr. Drumgold, basically climbed over the top of them. That's the way it seems at this stage, Jack.
Well, that's his view, and they're going to be. I think we're going to end up with two conflicting takes on what was actually happening. One from Drumgold and one from the police. One from the prosecution service generally, I should say, and one from the police. It's got a fair bit to play out. There'll be a fair bit more police evidence to be called, I would think. But the process is often messy, but this is not looking good, no.
Yes,
and Mr. Drumgold stepped aside from his position.
Yes, the prosecutor, as you say, has stepped aside. Detective Superintendent Scott Moller, that's a very high rank. He provided evidence under oath to the Sofronoff inquiry yesterday, and it was his view that the Lehrman prosecution did not fit a reasonable threshold for charges to be laid, and on the basis of it was unlikely that a prosecution would be made.
Yes,
that's the police view, and the public prosecutor viewed otherwise. Now, we don't need to talk too much without getting into some of the reasons why charges were ultimately laid on Bruce Lehrman. This was an alleged offence occurred on parliamentary on a parliamentary floor in a parliamentary office, and so that necessarily sort of supercharges all of the sort of influences and so forth, in regard to this. So it became politicised purely by circumstances of where the alleged offence was supposed to have occurred, Jack.
It also became politicised because it became a media circus.
And the media itself, I mean, we've just given some very high praise to Janet and to Ricey, who have followed this story very, very closely and have, I presume, and I'm only presuming, have received some information directly from police, which I think is another element of this inquiry. But some of the other media were very, very poor indeed.
Yes.
Well, come on.
I think there's another element of this whole kerfuffle that needs to look at. I'm not sure that the terms of the inquiry extend this far, but there were settlements made to Ms. Higgins and someone else, I think, that were extraordinarily quickly dealt with by Commonwealth standards, if I can put that politely.
Yes, the things, that machine doesn't move quickly normally, Jack, not when it comes to the provision of checks in the mail of, sort of telephone number type dimensions.
It's so many years since I've sat across the table from the Commonwealth in these sort of negotiations, but I did for a long time. And I checked with people who are still doing it these days, and their view is that they generally still move at a kind of a glacial speed.
So there was that, but there was also media cloying for there was a sense that Brittany Higgins was and her allegations were sort of snaffled up almost to create one particular media organisation or other to get the scoop. There were two significant figures, husband and wife team in the media, who were essentially trading a book that's never been written by Brittany Higgins with Peter Fitzsimon's offering, allegedly, I'm going to say allegedly, but offering to act essentially as her agent. And these stories were told well in advance of police being notified, Jack.
Indeed, the statements to police were timed to come after this publicity. There's a further element to it too, in that in that camp with that part of the media were two Labor senators as well,
Who are the two?
Katie Gallagher and Penny Wong.
Right. So, what sort of problems have they got, Jack?
Well, I don't think they've got a real problem, but there'll be some political. There'll be a bit of a political ouch about it. I would think if all of that is forced to be disclosed.
All right, so we'll keep up to date on the Sofronoff inquiry. Police will be giving evidence throughout the week. It's bound to be keeping headlines rolling on this case, which seemed, when it was first presented to us, Jack, as a fairly reasonable or fairly easy sort of a matter to work our way through. The offence either occurred or it didn't. But there's been a lot of political play in the background now that we know about.
Yes, well, Mr. Drumgold was very keen on an inquiry, and I think it seemed that he thought this would be a bit of a slam dunk on the police, but it hasn't proved to be so.
What's that rule, Jack? Never opt for an inquiry when you don't know how it's going to all pan out.
Yeah, that's a Sir Humphrey rule, I think. Only when you know what the result's going to be do you call an inquiry.
Well, this is one where they certainly don't. So we're going to where the outcomes are very, very uncertain, and we're going to keep an eye on the Sofronoff inquiry.
The best ever example of that was the inquiry into the ships, painters, and dockers in Australia.
Oh yeah.
Which turned from
terrific idea, Jack. Just a good old fashioned union bash. Give them a good kicking, and here's a union just replete with criminals. And what better, easier headlines to come rolling in, and then all of a sudden, oh my Lord, all these members of the Liberal Party were involved in tax minimisation. Oh, well, sorry, not minimisation, not legitimate minimisation, but were involved in taxation rorts. And then it all got very messy from there. Fraser government gone, who'd called the inquiry. And then Bob Hawke had to oversee it and extend it. It ran for 7 years.
Yeah. Frank
and do you know when the painters and dockers were finally, the Victorian branch of the Federated Ship Painters and Dockers Association were finally deregistered, Jack?
Oh, I can't remember. They were wound into the old Waterside Workers Federation.
Yeah, MUA. It's 1992. Yeah, okay. So the attempt to deregister the union occurred probably in 1976, 77. So it took a very long time to do that. And look, isn't it great now? We don't have any more crime on the docks anymore, Jack.
Yes, I'm sure that's terrific.
It's all been solved.
Yeah, another quick confession. I used to go down every Wednesday to the offices of the Waterside Workers Federation. We were their lawyers, and they were an absolute delight to act for.
Some very colourful characters in there, Jack. I go back to my childhood days where I would be glued to the paper whenever there was a painters and dockers election on, because whenever that happened, there would be shots fired all over the place and people disappearing and cars being pulled out of the Yarra, etc. It was always a colourful time when the secretary or president or the office bearers had to be elected.
It was a very lucrative position.
It was. If you ran that, you ran the crime that revolved around the docks, which still, by the way, is ongoing. When you got stuff coming in, and people are going to take it. So there you go. So the dockies are gone, but the problems on the docks continue. Now, the Fin Review, Jack, has gone pretty hard on the Victorian government here. There's a Victorian government expert panel on emissions reductions, which has recommended natural gas be largely phased out and the sale of EVs, Jack, emitting road vehicles, will end. So that kicks in our EV thing, Jack. You'll be looking at buying my lunch very, very soon at this sort of rate. But natural gas all came from growing up in Melbourne. We almost celebrated the fact that we were hooked up to the natural gas pipeline. Probably one of about 7 or 8 and we got the new gas stove, or not, got the new gas heater in the lounge room. But that's coming to an end, Jack.
So they say. I noticed the ABC this morning were running a piece from the Climate Council telling us that the way to get to the suitable amount of electric vehicles was to cut private vehicle use in half in the next 10 years.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. Look, firstly, I do want to say we got a letter from Lawrence Balcom, one of our listeners and one of our regular contributors. And Lawrence Balcom pointed out to me a mistake that I had made because I'd read a report that Mr. Toyota, the big boss at Toyota in Tokyo, or in Yokohama, basically said that the Toyota were going from hybrid and leapfrogging straight into hydrogen fuel cell technology. But that's not quite true. And Lawrence points out in a letter to me, said a couple of things. Firstly, Toyota has not bypassed EVs in favour of hydrogen. Yes, they are working on both, but their first fully electric car will be in Australia at the end of the year. That's this year, with plans for 2 more models to be available by early 2026. No time frame for hydrogen. Hydrogen sort of is being used a bit in California, and there are all sorts of issues with supply and also issues of cost of hydrogen. In California, which is really the only place, or one of the few places around the world with the infrastructure. But so it would appear that Mr. Toyota, either lied to us, or we misunderstood the report, because there are 3 models coming into the Australian market from Toyota that are electric powered, not hybrids, and one of them will be by the end of this year.
Perhaps they didn't tell him.
Maybe they didn't tell him. I always wonder whether he got the job because his name was Toyota, Jack, or whether he got the job and had to change his name to Toyota. I think that's kind of the way it goes. Lawrence has got some more contributions here, which we'll get to.
While we're on the subject of the gas, what I found interesting about the Victorian gas announcement was that it put the Victorian government in conflict with Ed Husick, who runs the area for the federal government, and indeed with the ACCC. They're much more keen on gas than the Victorian government.
Oh, yeah, definitely that's the case with the federal government. But look, here's one little comment here from the Victorian Energy Minister. That's Lily D'Ambrosio. And she said, Victoria has cut emissions by more than any other state since 2014, and we're laying the foundation for more long-lasting change with significant investments in renewable energy, such as bringing back the SEC, which was a huge vote winner for the Andrews government, I believe, in the last election. There was lots of chance of bring back the SEC on election night. I'll tell you now that Victoria has cut its emissions by more than any other state because they closed Yallourn, Jack. I mean, Yallourn was the biggest single emitter in Australia, with contributing 15% of all Australia's carbon emissions. And now that's closed, Jack. So that solves that problem fairly easily, provided you've got the energy to supplant it, and so far so good with the Victorians. But 2035 will be the end of natural gas, Jack. So they say.
Not according to the feds.
Yeah. Well, how much natural gas is coming from the Bass Strait pipelines now? I don't think any. I think it's all gone, isn't it?
Yeah. Meanwhile, Ed Husick's keen to open up the Narrabri and Beetaloo gas fields in New South Wales.
But yes, he said, I've been very keen, even though it caused me a bit of political grief. People get very upset when I talk about opening up Narrabri and Beetaloo, particularly in terms of those who don't necessarily share appreciation of the benefit of gas in the transition, but I've advocated for that. That is Minister Husick's comments there, Jack. we will have to wait and see about all of this. I think part of the problem here is we can't really have, and in the environment that we've had with the coalition government in power, it's largely been left to the states to make their own way, and we really just do need national initiatives on carbon reductions, which are sort of in place now. But staying with energy, Jack, of course, there was a meeting of government leaders in Japan over the weekend. President Biden was there before he had to scarper off to deal with the debt ceiling. But Anthony Albanese told Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida that Australia is committed to remaining a reliable supplier of energy to Japan in an attempt to calm concerns in Tokyo about future policy decisions in Canberra. I presume that's a lot about gas too, because I don't think, Australia does provide a lot of coal for the Japanese market, but their appetite for coal is diminishing quite rapidly, Jack.
Yeah, we supply 70% of their coal and about 40% of their gas.
Yeah, I think it's gas that's the major concern. Their consumption of coal is going down. I can almost pull up an amount there, but their renewable sector is probably about 10 times what the coal is, what the consumption of coal is in terms of gigawatt hours and things like that. Meanwhile, Jack, in the Ukraine,
just before we leave Australia, we can't go past and not talk about the wonderful thing that's happening at the ABC, the wonderful story that's happening there at the moment.
Oh, we absolutely do need to talk about this, and I must have skated over it, Jack. Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, we have, yes. Look, the Australian has run with a couple of stories. It was covered on Media Watch in a kind of bland way last night, that the, shall we say, the news reporting sector, that's where I think the problems lie, is a sort of monoculture, full of white Australians, or at least managed by white Australians, and this comes in response to the resignation of Stan Grant as the host of Q&A, Jack, after receiving a number of some really awful sort of racist sort of responses to his various social media accounts, Jack, and going on to say that the ABC had not supported him. Yeah,
Stuart Littlemore and David Salter jumped into the Sydney Morning Herald during the week.
Yes, that was yesterday.
And they said the real problem at the ABC is a consequence of journalists and their opinions. Their real problem is competence, or the lack of it, and a failure to recognise that staff cannot have a foot in both the fact and the opinion camps. Now, this set off a whole chain of events. They also said that early on, people like Mike Carlton were quite supportive of that, part of the wider ABC community, as I said. But later on, by the end of the day, I think Barry Cassidy was on the anti-Littlemore and Salter camp. So it's been amusing to watch. And Quentin Dempster, he wins the prize. He knew who to blame, because the argument really is, did Stan Grant get enough support from within the ABC or not? But Quentin Dempster knew who to blame: Murdoch.
Oh, well, yes, of course. I mean, that's his go-to position on just about everything. I have done some work at the ABC. I had a limited contract there. I was just talking to a mate of mine on Twitter about it in my DMs. I found the atmosphere there to be particularly cloying. It was not a pleasant experience. I'd come along just to explain what I was doing there on a limited contract to talk about the Fine Cotton episode. And that was part of, I think a maybe 6 or 7 part podcast. I really was hired as a consultant, and I was faced with a group of people who had no idea about storytelling, absolutely no idea about storytelling, and decided, or at least a couple did, that that they were going to look at this as a whodunit and try and resolve the mystery that I could have told them could not be resolved in a legal way, in a way that could avoid defamation actions, because there are certain things that are not provable. And I
and there
knew
are
this.
certain people who are involved who are of a particularly litigious nature.
Indeed. And so while I, as a consultant, was happy to provide that advice that, you can call in whoever you like who can make these assertions and all that stuff. In the end, you are looking at a legal minefield. Let's stick with the funny part of the story, the actual bit that happened in and around the racetrack and the immediate conspirators, because that is very, very funny. But if you want to look at more broadly who organised this, whether it was George Freeman or Robbie Waterhouse or anybody else, you cannot prove it. So that's an aside almost, because really what the person driving the podcast was trying to do was make a name for themselves in order to get some form of boost to their career within the news department. And that became really almost impossible to resolve or to reconcile. So, yeah, it was.
Well, I'm on a little more insulted camp on this. From the outside, it looks to be a pretty poorly run organisation. Certainly, the bits that they're very good on the technical aspects of what goes wrong with ABC newscasting. It's the only TV station I watch, by the way. I'm quite a loyal ABC watcher. But what there is a lack of is some hard-headed editing, that things go to where that someone should have said, you need to check this before you run this, or you need to think about whether this is an appropriate response, etc., etc. That doesn't seem to happen. And that's an organisational problem.
I certainly take the view that opinion creeps into reporting too easily if not managed properly, and I think that's something that the ABC have had a problem with. I go back to my mate Lee Sales, who studiously avoided that stuff, right? Studiously avoided putting a flag in the ground and saying, this is where I stand politically. And what she got for her trouble as host of 7:30 and one of the ABC's main news personalities was a flogging from the left and a probably somewhat lighter flogging from the right. I mean, she could do. I mean, she certainly got more strength of character than to pander to an audience, but yeah, she was basically sort of hounded out of the position by essentially people on the left who just didn't like what she was saying, didn't like the way she conducted her interviews.
And didn't like the news they were getting, more to the point.
That's the thing, isn't it? I mean, bias is media bias is like beauty in one respect and one respect only. It is in the eye of the beholder. And so it's perceived bias rather than actual bias. But I still think, I mean, Salesy notwithstanding, people like, and very fine journalists, very fine political journalists, are too often being asked to provide opinion, and you can often see it in the same report. So there'll be a report on a political matter, and then that ABC personality who's done the report will also offer their opinion on it. And I think that's the thing that needs to change within the ABC. Wouldn't you say, Jack?
Well, classic example last night, I watched a very odd thing for a bloke who was resigning sort of essentially because the job had become too much for him. He did one last show.
He did
I found that a little bit odd.
I never watched the show, but I did see Media Watch, and then it ran into it. And I went, oh, Stan. What's Stan doing there?
Yeah, I thought he was off on sort of almost like mental health leave.
Tomorrow.
Anyway,
It starts tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Yeah. We'll come to a similar situation shortly, but that seemed very odd to me. But I actually watched the whole show, and it was about 25 to 30% Stan's opinions, and that's what's gone wrong with the ABC.
Yeah. Now, look, to be fair, John Bannon is the current host of Media Watch. I don't know if you saw it, Jack, but I thought Bannon explored that pretty well. This idea that opinions are being promoted while news is being reported. Now you can get away with that in a commercial media organisation because it does happen quite a lot. But with the ABC, I don't think it's sustainable.
Yeah. I watched the British Question Time, which was the forerunner of Q&A, the BBC show, and there's one distinct difference. The anchor of Question Time, Fiona Bruce, is interested in what the panelists and the audience think about an issue, whereas what's happened with Q&A is that the presenter is interested in what they think the audience and panelists' views should be.
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't watch the show. I find it tedious for pretty much those reasons.
Well, I'm one of the last three listeners. I accept that.
You're a stubborn man, Jack. To me, the issue around that program is that it really should just be shut down. It just needs to be shut down. Could be retooled, if you like. It needs to be presented in that way. I think when Tony Jones first started it, that was the way it was. That it was, I don't really care what Tony Jones' opinions are on these sorts of things. Tony might give you a little bit of insight. As a caveat, I get on well with Tony Jones. He's a good bloke. But yeah, so that program had something to offer in those early days. But when you start the program, and you would have noticed this last night, Jack, he starts off with a monologue from the presenter.
Yeah, and it ended with a longer one. You didn't wait till the end. Yeah, yeah.
I'm disappointed.
So it was about 20, at least 20% what Stan thought about something. Look, Mike Carlton suggested during the week that what was needed at Q&A was a mercy killing, and I'm inclined to agree.
Oh yeah, it needs to be shut down, as they say in the industry, Jack, and retooled.
In fact, it needs to be ploughed in and the earth salted.
Oh dear, it's that bad. Well, you keep watching it, Jack.
Well, I mean, I'm such a loyal ABC viewer. That's the only thing I watch.
Look, just going on from the fine cotton work that I did there. I received a phone call from a friend who used to work at the Australian and now works at the ABC, and he said, "Oh, what happened? What happened with the fine cotton thing?" I said, "Well, you tell me what happened." And he said, I heard management just walked all over the newsroom. I said, well, that's one interpretation. So that sort of tells you that the newsroom is this very, very controlling entity, and that they will put their own spin on things. And when you go and look at there's some very fine journalists there. One of my very, very best mates is the European correspondent for the ABC, Steve Canane, wonderful guy, wonderful journo. There's some terrific guys working the coalface there. But there are some pretty ordinary time servers around the place as well. Look, you could say the same of just about any other media organisation, but with the ABC, it is the national broadcaster. Even watched it as far away as in Hong Kong, and they need to be very clinical about the way they present their news programs.
Can I just give them a shout out though? A couple of things they've done recently have been really very good. Their Pacific shows, because I watch the Asia Pacific version of the ABC. But they have a new Pacific sports show and a Pacific news show, and they're very, very good, and they're a terrific idea.
Straight after Q&A, Jack, there's the China news, a China magazine program.
Yeah, and there is an Indian magazine program, and they're both very good. This is all good stuff from the ABC.
No, definitely, they're very capable of doing these things. I think the newsroom needs to have a bit of a clean out, just quietly. All media organisations, or workers, or journalists, etc., are under the pump, and there should be no reason why some of the ABC people should be sort of glad-handed into tenure, Jack. All right. We just want to go on to the Voice now. I was a little bit quick moving overseas. We won't do that just yet. The Voice, Jack. I just want to add Lawrence Belcom's note on that. He said, a quick look at the lacklustre folks sitting behind Peter Dutton would suggest he's got the job for as long as he wants it. This is in regard to our conversation about where Peter is as the opposition leader. He said, but the Voice, the biggest plus for the Yes case is the familiar faces popping up to argue for the other side, the same people who couldn't say sorry because it would open the floodgates for litigation. The same people who argued that same-sex marriage was a slippery slope to the destruction of civilised society. Howard, Abbott, LNP politicians and the Sky News crowd. This is still going on with the letter. They were resoundingly defeated in the plebiscite. My gut is telling me they will be losers again. Jack, just to interrupt that flow, the Nine Media published a poll with those in favour at 53, those against 47, and that is within that band of failure in terms of a poll, with 2.5%, 3% could go either way on the margin of error. So the no case is tracking a greater support at this stage. That seems to be what the polling is saying.
And sorry, Lawrence, it's tracking support well beyond the Howard, Abbott, Dutton group. But they're not going to defeat the referendum. The referendum will fail, I think, not because they urged against it, because the proponents of the referendum, the Yes group, have failed in their process and their proposal.
Well, the Yes argument actually rolled out their television advertising, and you wouldn't see this on the ABC, Jack, on your ABC. No. Well, possibly you will, but there is a tilted sentiment in the advertising. It's actually quite effective, I think, because the way it ends is prepare yourself for the debate. So go and make yourself informed about how you want to deal with this. It's obviously advocating the Yes position and explains why. But the tag at this stage, now we're recording on the 23rd of May, the tag is go and get yourself informed, which I think is I think it's a pretty good strategy, and I think it's a good piece of advertising. I did notice, Jack, the other mob, the no advocates, had got around on their website and interviewed a number of Indigenous Australians, including one that they claimed was the grandson of Vincent Lingiari. Vincent Lingiari, one of the great Indigenous reformers, land reformers, passed the handful of sand into Gough Whitlam's hand, very famously. Turned out it wasn't Vincent Lingiari's grandson at all. And when he was asked about this, Jack, the fellow who said, yes, no, it's a different mob. They might be cousins, but that's about as close as it gets. But he had just been handed a piece of paper and asked to read it. I find that really distasteful, and I got up one Monday and I said, well, I hope you've taken that down. Oh, yes, it's all come down now. Pretty awful stuff.
Yeah. Well, I just say to Lawrence that most referendums in Australia fail. They're all put up by a government. That is, they're put up by the political party that's more popular than their opponents. I don't think that Dutton, Howard, Abbott, etc., are going to have much to do with the result at all. Most referendums fail not because they're are unpopular in a political sense, that they fail because they fail to persuade a majority of the people in the majority of states to make a fundamental change.
Might I also add, Jack, that I think the more someone like Tony Abbott gets involved, the worse it is for the no case.
Yeah, you've already given Dutton and Abbott, etc., a pass. Like, you won't be able to blame them when this fails, because you've told them that everything that they do is good for the yes case.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've seen Abbott's op-eds.
So I'll hold you to that if it fails. You can't be blaming Dutton.
Well, I mean, look, we saw this with Abbott. We've seen Abbott's been on the wrong side of history so many times, it's not funny. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, Abbott really doesn't have a lot of credibility in his opinions. And as Lawrence has pointed out, he was a firm advocate for against same-sex marriage postal poll, I think we ended up with. Firm advocate for that. Basically, he has been a naysayer on virtually every significant social reform put to the Australian people over the last 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, but they're only 30% of the vote. That's not going to defeat the referendum. At the moment, I would say that the Dutton, Abbott, Howard camp would be about 30% of the population. So that's not going to defeat the thing.
What I'm saying is
the referendum's going to be lost. It's not going to be won by the no case. It's going to be lost by the yes case.
I understand what you're saying, and what I'm saying is that the no case, the more strident it becomes, and they were exposed telling a few porkies last week, the no advocates, the more strident they are, the more omnipresent people like Tony Abbott are, that will be, and he is basically political death. I was talking to a bloke who's absolute, worth a mozza, banking executive, simply didn't vote Liberal for the first time in his life because Tony Abbott was a candidate there. And that goes back to Warringah. So I'd say the more, I mean, Howard might be an exception, but the more they use people like Abbott and also Dutton, the more likely the yes vote is to succeed. That's my view. So I tend to agree with Lawrence in that regard. But anyway, we will see. We've got a long way to go. The advertisements are still rolling out. We still haven't heard from Peter Garrett, Jack. We still haven't heard from Paul Kelly. We did hear quite a lot from the footballers over the weekend. I don't know if you saw that, Jack. The AFL, the ARU, the NRL have all advocated for the yes position. I'm not quite sure how effective that will be, but they had a lot of the Indigenous AFL footballers commenting on The Voice late last week. Now we are going to move overseas, Jack, and it would seem that Bakhmut has fallen to the Russians, and the New York Times ran with online. New York Times ran with some footage of a drone that they put up in the air. Would have been very lucky not to get it shot down, but the drone cast an eye over the city of Bakhmut. There's not a lot left there, Jack.
No.
And,
couldn't imagine there would be. It's been hand-to-hand, not quite hand-to-hand fighting, but street by street fighting.
House to house almost, yeah. And so what's the benefit of this for the Russians now?
They needed a win.
They needed it. They did need a win indeed, yeah, and they've got one. Now, the other significant move in this particular conflict is that Zelensky met with Biden, and Biden's assured them of continued military aid, including the transfer of F-16 fighter jets, Jack, to Ukraine.
I think they're coming from the Netherlands, aren't they?
I believe so. That it is a faster, more capable fighter than the Russian MiGs. But the Russians, as you might expect, are not terribly happy about it. Russia's ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Antonov, has said You reckon it'd be into planes, wouldn't he, with a name like Antonov? There is no infrastructure for the operation of the F-16 in Ukraine, and the needed number of pilots and maintenance personnel is not there either, he said. So he's suggesting that would involve American fighter pilots, or indeed NATO fighter pilots, manning the F-16s from somewhere external to the Ukraine.
Mm.
Is that a hot spot?
Well, it's a bit to play out there. I'll put it that way.
Well,
I saw Biden on the telly saying that he's assuring everybody that they will only be allowed to use within Ukrainian airspace, etc., etc. But
yeah, there were all sorts of limits that Biden did put on.
But it's this is all promises and threats and all that sort of stuff. We have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, there were reports, of course, that Putin is actually considering an exit strategy. Look, a lot of this stuff is unsourced and particularly unreliable. But if they're going to expend that much manpower, that much loss of life, casualties, degrading of their military capability for the town or city of Bakhmut, they must be realising that any more adventurism in Ukraine is going to become at a significant cost to them.
Yes. Well, we'll just have to wait and see.
Well, they're sensible enough to make those assessments, Jack, because at the end of it, and I've talked about this a lot, Russia will remain a global outcast economically for a very, very long time. It's not as if fighting stopped and there was some sort of negotiated peace that Russia would that everyone would drop their sanctions against the Russians. That they will be an outcast in the world for a very, very long time, and they've all got to understand that, and that's going to really have a huge impact on their economy going forward, and something that they will not be able to get themselves out of. Their GDP figures are really, really poor, and there's no sign of them going forward. So they're basically locked into long, enduring recessions, if not depression. That's the cost of this. That's the cost of the invasion. Is you will be a pariah in the world for a very, very long time to come. The quicker they get out of it, the quicker it ends. That's got to be the pressure. All right, the United States, Jack, the Durham report, it was just a whole pile of nothing, wasn't it?
I think the FBI agree with you, actually. The FBI were quick to come out and said, "Oh, look, we had a lot of problems, but we fixed them." So I don't think they thought it was a nothing.
Well, what did it say? Was there an attempt by US intelligence and law enforcement agencies to stitch up Donald Trump? It was Donald Trump who hired Durham as a special investigator. Did any of that happen?
I think there's some very poor behaviour by the FBI, and I think it's certainly no ticking bomb for the FBI. But the FBI wouldn't have come out and said they've had to fix the problem was because.
I think there are a couple of issues around the political allegiances of certain FBI agents and their, well, perhaps the best way of putting it, their regard towards Donald Trump. But really,
it's not a career ender for those people because their careers had already ended.
That's right. Yeah.
Comey, Strzok, Page, Clapper, etc. They're all gone.
Well, yeah. Look, I'm just not totally sure about any sort of significant thing. I mean, like, Trump has always babbled that this was a stitch up from US security and law enforcement agencies, and that's really just not been supported. It's not supported at all.
It neither fulfilled the dreams of the Trump supporters, nor was it an exoneration in the sense that the Democrat supporters suggested. The most fun bit of it for me was the fact that Obama, Biden, and someone else, Susan Rice, were all briefed on the fact that the Steele dossier came from the Clinton campaign. And this wouldn't have been news to Obama and Biden because they'd fought primary campaigns against the Clinton machine and they would have known how hard they play politics.
Yeah. No, fair enough. I mean, it doesn't support the nonsense that Trump has come up with. I do note too, Jack, that E. Jean Carroll is seeking new damages for Trump from Donald Trump for comments that he made on CNN. So he's looking like he's going to be a little bit lighter in the wallet again.
Yeah, well, he might think she's a cost of business.
Yeah, indeed. All right. George Santos, they've tried to expel him. The Dems have tried to expel him, but he was that attempt was defeated on party lines.
Well, you really couldn't expel him while he's only been charged. Really,
no, that's right. Yeah. So it will run on, and his particular part of Long Island will be up for re-election in 2024. And what chance do you give him, Jack?
I could move over there now and beat him, I reckon.
Well, only if you pretend to be Jewish, Jack.
Mm-hmm.
Which is something he did. I think I said last week that he pretended he was Cuban, but no, he's actually pretending that he was Jewish. He pretended a great many things. He's got a fantastic resume. Doesn't stand up to a lot of scrutiny, but terrific. On paper.
More specifically, he cut the Jew and ish into two words. He said he wasn't a Jew, but he's ish Jew.
He was Jew-ish.
Yeah,
I know.
Jew adjacent, you might say.
Very strange.
To use the current terminology, Jew adjacent.
Yeah, I think the thing is he ticked a lot of progressive boxes for Republicans who perhaps live on Long Island, and that was why he was elected. But it was all made up. So he's got some fairly extensive charges headed his way, and he'll be a busy boy dealing with all of those. The big issue for the United States, though, Jack, is the debt ceiling. My God, we've got to go through this all over again.
Yeah.
When the debt ceiling is raised, it's often raised without any nonsense. But when this all happened during the Obama time, it was threatened during the Trump stage as well. Every time the debt ceiling has got to go up, it needs the endorsement of the Congress. And if the Congress don't do it, what happens, Jack? If the Congress don't endorse?
Well, the Congress controls the purse strings, in effect, so there's no money to pay anybody.
So it essentially just shuts your public service down, right?
Yeah, it does. But this has happened 18 times under Ronald Reagan, 8 times under Bill Clinton.
I remember the Clinton ones, I don't remember the Reagan ones. I really don't.
7 times under George W. Bush. And
every time there's market turmoil, every time, last time that I can recall, national parks were closed because they couldn't pay for the park guides and what have you. And of course, people who work in the public service don't get paid, and then you've got people who are on social security payments who are not getting paid as well. So it's a potential disaster. So Joe's given the summit at Hiroshima the flick and gone back to try and negotiate with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy.
Yeah, it always kind of reminds me of a barrister friend of mine who used to be surprised every Easter when his provisional tax bill would arrive. We ought to see this coming. It's the conflict between the three arms of the United States government: the judiciary on one hand, a Congress in the middle, and the and the presidency. And
It's insanely political.
ultimately, the Congress controls the purse strings. That's the way it's designed. So the president ultimately has to go and negotiate with the Congress.
It's almost an act from Congress of political suicide, a political murder-suicide, where they commit suicide first and then threaten to murder someone else afterwards. I just wanted to create, give our listeners some facts. The federal government spent $6.48 trillion in 2022, down $920 billion from the previous year after adjusting for inflation. Spending per person totaled $19,434 per person, a 13% decrease from 2021. Expenditures were distributed across several major categories, with the largest going towards grants to state and local governments. So they're actually spending less now, Jack. So why are they having these problems?
Well, you can argue the merits all you like, but the constitutional reality is that the president's going to have to negotiate with the Congress to get what he wants.
He thinks he can look. He can look at the 14th Amendment and just do it by executive order.
That's a novel idea. I haven't seen any constitutional lawyer from America of any merit at all agree with it.
I haven't seen that, but this is part of the jockeying that will go on. The 14th Amendment of the United States. Well, let's have a quick look, Jack. What is the 14th Amendment? It was passed Civil War. Granted citizenship to persons born or naturalised in the United States. It doesn't seem like it's all that relevant, Jack.
The debt ceiling's been raised 74 times in 20 years. 74 times from March 62 to May 2011. And no one raised the 14th Amendment argument all that time. There you go.
Well, section 4 of the 14th Amendment reads thus: the validity of the public debate of the United States, authorised by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for service in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. But neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in aid of insurrection. I just don't think that's going to work. But nice try, Joe. We'll see. I mean, our markets, again, global markets, going to have to be thrown into turmoil once again. We'll soon find out in the ongoing disaster that is American politics. Jack, in Kenya, I don't know if you've seen these reports. A death cult. The body count now is at 202. This really caught my eye. I've got a particular interest in cults and a particular loathing of them. This cult, Jack, and like a lot of cults, they do become death cults. But Paul Mackenzie, the leader of the Good News International Church, this is an indigenous Kenyan group, by the way, had ordered or was accused of ordering his followers to starve their children and themselves to death so they could go to heaven before the end of the world, which he predicted to be on April 15. That was sort of 6 weeks ago, Paul, so you're way out. He's a former taxi driver, by the way. 202 people died of starvation. It's an extraordinary thing. And what I find most extraordinary about this is, if we think about places like Jonestown, and you may have seen some footage, Jack, certainly our listeners may have seen some footage. There's really only one piece of footage taken from Jonestown, and there we see people lining up to take their, to basically drink poison and die, and they were doing so at gunpoint. Some did it willingly, others not. But here we've got people, the level of devotion, Jack, the level of devotion to actually starve themselves to death. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Well, Paul Mackenzie is currently in custody in Kenya. They haven't figured out what to charge him with yet, but they have requested his custody for a further 90 days. And there has been in Kenya a judicial inquiry called into what has happened here, Jack. And we see this sort of stuff all around the world, mate. We see this sort of mind manipulation. Cults are by nature exploitative. And as I say, many of them become death cults when things start falling apart.
Beware of anyone who tells you the world's going to end by a certain date.
Yeah, well, it's the foundation of a lot of cults. The foundation of a lot of cults is the apocalypse, and QAnon is one of those. The storm is coming, and so when you start to believe, when you fall for that sort of nonsense, that you're capable of just about anything, but this really just stretches the bounds for me, because these are people who, being manipulated, having their thoughts controlled, essentially, led themselves to starving their own children. Pretty amazing, Jack. Now, of course, this couldn't happen in Australia, could it?
What do you mean? We elect the apocalyptic end of the Greens?
Well, you could say that. No, I'm sticking with cults, and I just wanted to briefly talk about.
No, I thought we were on cults.
Well, we'll stay with death cults.
Okay.
The Church of Scientology. Well, it's called the Church of Scientology in Australia because of a High Court ruling, and the High Court ruling was essentially established by. It was in an action between the Victorian government and Scientology, and the High Court determined at that time, and I'm thinking of judgment, was about 1978, 1980, something of that order, and it's quite a reasonable assessment, it's quite a reasonable judicial determination that the High Court said it was not for them to decide what a religion was, and they did so fully acknowledging that religion is full of charlatanism and what have you. But they said it's not the role of judges to determine what a religion is. So on the basis of that ruling, what we have in Australia is if you behave like a religion, if you believe you are a religion, then you are a religion. And you've got access to potentially, establishing yourself as a charity, not having to pay tax, all the way into sort of very strange sort of cult-like behaviour. What are we going to do about that, Jack?
We just have to go along with it for the moment.
Yeah, because it's the only time law enforcement will intervene is when there's when they come to a belief that children are being exploited, people are not being well looked after, those sorts of things. So you only deal with these things once they become issues. I was talking to a bloke. He's an intelligence analyst with counter-terrorism with one of our police departments, and he was saying that a lot of the sort of freedom movement people who simply haven't moved on. I mean, the majority have gone back to their lives. They might be unhappy, but they've gone back to their lives. But then there's this sort of group that remain there, almost cult-like, whether they're in Canberra or hang around the Victorian Parliament or whatever it is. These people, they've got no way back. They've sort of joined a cult, and there's no way back for them. I don't know where they're going to end up, and I'm not entirely sure that I'd like to be spending my tax dollars on debunking their cults for them. All right, we'll move on, Jack. We want to have a bit of a talk about energy, and you've pointed out some figures here from India and Indian coal production. This financial year, India has produced 703 million tonnes of coal, Jack.
Something like that, yeah.
I think now India is the biggest user of coal for electricity generation outside of China. That'd be correct too.
That's correct, yeah.
And China is the world leader by some considerable margin. So here we have these two developing nations, for want of a better term, and they are the big coal burners around the world.
Yes.
And you've got a quote here from Andrew Neil. Who's Andrew Neil?
He's a distinguished British journalist.
Right. And what's he saying?
He's saying that the global demand for coal will hit an all-time peak this year.
Yes, he says it might slip a bit thereafter, but by 2030, demand is still projected to be what it was in 2015, which symbolises a failure of the COP process. I'm not entirely sure that I agree, but certainly we can agree that 8 billion tonnes of coal was burnt in largely for electricity and in the production of steel. 8 billion tonnes was extracted from the ground in 2022 globally, and that is a world record. But according to the International Agency, global coal will rise by 1.2 this year, that's 2023, surpassing 8 billion tonnes, as I said. Indeed, China, India, and Indonesia, three of the most populous nations on Earth, in fact, 1, 2, and I think about 5, they're the three largest coal producers and will all hit production records this year. But, Jack, there's another way of looking at this. And I looked at the International Energy Agency. In 2021, about 250 gigawatts of new solar and wind generation capacity was installed worldwide, compared with only 14 gigawatts of net new coal generation capacity. New solar and wind capacity is being deployed 18 times faster worldwide than net new coal capacity. So it follows that solar and wind generation will rapidly overtake coal generation, as most existing coal power stations will grow old and retire before 2050. And it goes on to say, globally, solar is set to pass coal in terms of electricity generation by terawatt in 2026, and will pass all other forms, gas, nuclear, hydro, etc., in 2031. And in China, for example, in 2021, 120 gigawatts came online from renewables, with only 24 from coal. In India, 5.2 gigawatts came from coal and 12.7 gigawatts from renewables. Globally, 250 gigawatts come from solar, around 10 times that of coal, Jack.
So what's your take on that? Do you think that coal's not going to be needed?
Well, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that you presented a lot of figures here indicating that coal was the king supplier. And certainly in 2022, we had the largest amount of coal dug out of the ground. But what we're also seeing is a profound shift towards renewables, and that one day coal will not be king. Coal cannot be king going into the future. It
mightn't be king, but it's still going to be needed. That's my point. I don't really care what's the biggest one. My point is that coal, the demand for fossil fuels, is not going away.
Well, it has to. And I'm not saying that from a point of view of climate change reports or anything like that. But on these figures, it will go into decline, and it will go into decline for a very good reason, and that is for countries who have to import coal from places like Australia. Are going to have to keep shoveling in what is an expensive resource. Are going to have to keep shoveling it into a furnace to create electricity, or they can go with renewables plus battery storage, and they will have a cheaper and more a cheaper and more reliable power source that way. And that's the way things are going. China, as I say, this is the International Energy Association, says that globally solar is set to pass coal in 3 years by terawatt generation, and will pass all other forms of energy or electricity generation by 2031, Jack.
There's two things about that. We'll deal with this another day, but there's a mathematical difficulty with those calculations, in the sense that how do they work out what the capacity of that solar installation is? Is it the maximum it can produce, or is it what it produces on its best day or its worst day or its average? No one really knows the answer to that question from those figures.
Well, you're not trying to tell us that you don't get electricity when the sun doesn't shine. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is, what's the figure they're using? But we can talk this another day. My point is this: that fossil fuel use is not going away. The only way it goes away is if countries like Australia say to Japan, our big trading partner, China, our biggest trading partner, and countries like India, that we won't mine coal, we won't extract gas and send it to you. Although we know that you need it and you want it, we won't sell it to you.
Yeah, I'm just looking at Japan, for example. So their level of renewables is around about 10 times what their level of renewable output in gigawatts is about 10 times that of coal in Japan right now.
They certainly don't sound like they're going away from fossil fuels. They were just telling the Australian Prime Minister to be careful about this because we want to buy your fossil fuels.
Yeah, mainly
that's going
gas.
To stay for a long time.
Mainly gas. So you've got coal. Part of the problem is that you've got coal at such a high price. That's part of the problem. That's the thing that will actually ultimately make it redundant. That it's just too expensive. You have to keep loading it into a furnace, and you have to keep buying it for most of the world. You have to keep buying it from another country like Australia, from a major provider. Jack, you've often mentioned the fact that browns and yellows and some shouldn't they have access to electricity? Isn't access to electricity total now in India, for example?
Most of the country got access to some electricity. It's probably just a light globe in the ceiling, but that's most of the country already has it. But they haven't got access to power in the way that we have. They haven't got air conditioning everywhere. None of the things that we consider normal in Australia are there, and they aren't in a fair bit of China yet as well.
Yeah, but it's not as if people don't have access. I mean, the rest of it is driven by market forces. It's not as if people don't have access. In sub-Saharan Africa, for example, around 50% of the population, it is totality in India, by the way, in terms of access to electricity. The rest of it's driven by market forces. So if you can afford an air conditioner, that's a separate issue. And you can afford an extended power bill as a result. That's a separate issue. In sub-Saharan Africa, you've got 50% of people who have access to electricity, and they're not responding by coal consumption any other way. Yes, there is a new coal-fired power station in Zimbabwe. We've gone through some of the issues that South Africa has had. A lot of it relying on old coal-fired power stations that are no longer fit for purpose. But in the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, they are not going down this coal route, Jack. Because there is absolutely no growth. And when actually looking for coal consumption in sub-Saharan Africa, it's really, really difficult to determine it, but just the full extent of it. But when we see their figures collectively, they're not growing. So coal production is not working in those areas where there is the greatest need for a more widespread electricity connections.
When they get rich enough to afford widespread use of electricity, they'll be looking for fossil fuels to power it.
I don't understand that, Jack, because one thing that's going to drive it is the market, and the market is telling them coal is expensive. And
okay,
you're going
you
to
said
need
that about
a lot
5
of
times. You said that about 5 times. We can move on from that. Okay.
All right. Well, you threw up a whole bunch of figures on coal production and so forth, as if they were just immutable truths, and they're really not. They're not. I mean, a renewable production of electricity is increasing, and coal will start to slide. And I'll have a bet with you within 2 years you'll see coal production reduce. All right. Now we're going to move on to where are we? Greek elections, Jack, and the all-conquering Mitsotakis has been re-elected.
Yeah, pretty good result, really. Unusual for Greece. I think I read somewhere that no ruling party in Greece has increased its share of the vote on their next election for more than 40 years.
For more than 40 years. And this is the first election, I think, for Greece where there have not been the impediments passed upon them by the EU in terms of debt reduction and what have you. That's all ended now, well and truly out of the system now.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, no ruling party in Greece has increased its share of the vote in an election for more than 40 years. So what are we talking about? Mitsotakis is a sort of centre-right party. Is that right?
Yeah, that's in Australian terms, that's how it would be characterised, yeah.
Great many Greek Australians, of course. I think Melbourne, the third largest Greek city in the world, Jack.
I believe so, yes.
Athens would be first. What would be Thessalonica would be just about the next, I suppose. Yep. I don't know. I don't know what the number 2 is. Yes, all right. Moving on to sport. And been a huge week in AFL in terms of coaches, Jack. There's been one Alistair Clarkson, the much heralded appointment at North Melbourne. He's on leave indefinitely, been replaced by Brett Ratton. They're pretty bloody stiff to lose. I mean, it was their own fault against the Swans. They allowed one extra interchange than is permissible, and it was a free kick awarded to Sydney in front of goal, which gave them a 3-point win. Alistair Clarkson, according to an interview with Brett Ratton on the weekend, said he won't be far away, that Brett was just looking after the club for a little while. What do we make of Alistair Clarkson's leave, obviously under pressure over the report conducted by the Hawthorn Football Club when he was coach there?
The club did say they expected him back this year, certainly.
Yeah, I would think so.
It's a bit of a contrast to Stan. When you're an AFL coach, if you're going off because you're stressed and had enough, you don't have coach one last game before you go.
That was an odd thing. I did see an interview with a North Melbourne football player before Clarko took leave, and he sort of suggested in a light-hearted way that Clarko was a little bit mad. So he might have been a bit manic in the last few days or last few weeks.
I've heard similar reports from his time at Hawthorn, and he won 4 premierships there.
Yeah, true.
I think his casting aside him having to him taking leave from North Melbourne. This is a damning indictment of the Hawthorn Football Club and the AFL in the way they have dealt with the allegations that were made about Hawthorn.
The AFL can't do anything about this now. They have to simply say, we don't have the information available for us to make any determination, and then leave it open to the civil courts to sort it out.
The three people against who the allegations have made have never, ever been provided with the allegations and given an opportunity to respond.
Not even a copy of the Hawthorn Footy Club report.
Yeah, this is a complete destruction of proper procedure, and it's a disgrace to the AFL and to the Hawthorn Football Club. The outgoing CEO, Gil McLaughlin, Gil, you've got one job: fix this before you go.
Got to go. But how can they fix it, Jack? How can they fix it? They hate being embarrassed, of course, the AFL, but they've really got to accept some embarrassment here and say, we don't have enough information to act on this. That's all they've got to say, and they should have said it last year before the season started.
They squigged it by appointing an independent group to run this for them, who failed, utterly failed.
But who couldn't, and the people who had made the allegations against Clarkson and 2 others, isn't it? they would not present. They were deeply distrustful of the process. So there was no information obtained. Clarkson didn't speak, as far as I know, was not asked to speak at this particular inquiry. And in the end, they've got nothing. So just say you've got nothing and move on.
So you go right back to when Hawthorn got the report. What they should have done was said, this is very serious. It involves people in our club. But before we go to the AFL, we can notify the AFL that this exists, but we've got to afford procedural fairness to the people against whom the allegations are made, as well as the people making the allegations. Everybody's got to be treated transparently and fairly. And Hawthorn and the AFL have utterly failed to do that.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. Meanwhile, Jack Demmer, the Richmond coach, 3 premierships under his belt, in a shock announcement, came forward yesterday and hung his hat up as coach of Richmond Footy Club, in a tearful sort of thing. He just basically, from what we gather, is just kind of out of rocket fuel, Jack. He realised he couldn't get much more out of his team.
It's a high-pressure existence, being an AFL coach, being a sports coach generally, and sometimes people do run out of petrol tickets.
Yeah, that's what he said. He looked at his side. They had a 1-point loss against the Bombers on the weekend. They've won 3 from 10. It overtly doesn't sound too bad. I've been watching the Tigers a bit this year. I think they're going okay, but they've got a problem in that, and it is one of the problems that the West Coast Eagles are facing right now. When you had that period of prosperity, that's the time when you've got to trade your senior players, start to get some high draft picks coming through. But it's obviously a difficult thing to do, given that there are loyalty to these players. They've given you premierships. And in the case of West Coast Eagles, yes, they've got a whole pile of injuries at the moment, but they haven't renewed and they haven't gone and gotten those high draft picks when the time was right. And now they languish at the bottom of the ladder. They got beaten by 100 plus points by Hawthorn, who were second bottom. And that's how bad things can get. So that's how bad things can get for Richmond if they don't start renewing. Like, you can't top up at that time. They picked up Taranto and Hopper from the Giants, 2 good midfielders who'd be good servants to the club going forward for a long time. But the time really now is to get those high draft picks into the Richmond Footy Club.
Yeah, it doesn't always work. Hawthorn pushed out the captain, Luke Hodge, and the winger, who's a 4-time premiership player, but it was all too late. Sometimes you don't get it right. But look, for Damien Hardwick, all credit to him. If he feels like he just can't do it, and it's a job that's so demanding, if he can't do it anymore, he's doing the right thing rather than just phone it in for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I agree. I thought David Teague, the former Carlton coach, might be coaching there because he's in the football staff there. But no, there is another interim coach who will be stepping up and doing it presumably for the rest of the season. The Richmond Footy Club takes a toll on those involved at the very top level. We've got the Test Championship really only a few weeks away, Jack, at the Oval, Australia v India. And then we've got the Ashes immediately after that. I saw Cameron Green is the first Australian 100 scorer in the IPL since Dave Warner. He's made a few of them. Smith's taking blinding catches, hasn't made a lot of runs. Marnus Labuschagne's in form. It's actually looking pretty good for Australia in the Ashes. Jofra Archer will miss the whole summer. I'd suggest that'll be the end of his career. Anderson's got an injury, and he's older than you and me, Jack, so it'll take him a while to come back from that. And I think there's a question mark over Ollie Robinson as well. So they've got some issues with their bowling.
Ollie Robinson bowled superbly. I saw him stitching up Steve Smith in the nets, and then in the match, he skittled Marnus Labuschagne very nicely as well. It's a fair way out for the Ashes, but yeah, it's looking good for Australia. I don't know whether you saw the Green innings, but it was a masterpiece.
Yeah, look, there's not much that boy cannot do. He's still a very young man, of course, and he's belting hundreds in the IPL. He's just a cricketer.
I think it was 100 or 54, I think.
It's a big unit, mate. He hits it very, very hard. And I seriously think we're not going to see. His problem's always going to be management. You don't want to let him play too much short stuff. Because he just gives you so much. He can be that fifth bowler, and he can also come in the middle order and belt 100. He's an absolute jewel, Jack. These players are so rare. So that takes us through that. We did also see in the Premier League now, poor old Arsenal been swept aside by Man City. Man City have got the title, and they've got 2 more to get. Champions League and the FA Cup still in the offing for them. Arsenal have been the butt of many jokes, but I reckon they've done okay, finishing second.
I don't think the Man City players are going to be picked up by the Hong Kong ICAC for
they're on a few bubble league. I mean, look, one of the disasters there, Jack, is Chelsea, who are finishing in the bottom second half. They've spent over, crikey, I can't remember how many millions of dollars recruiting players, and it just hasn't worked. They've been one of the big spenders in the Premier League. Not that clubs like Man City and Man United and Liverpool aren't spending big too, but they've been one of the biggest spenders. And there they are sitting in the bottom half of the table. That's a disaster.
Perhaps
and that's all because of the Ukraine invasion, or the invasion of Ukraine, of course, isn't it?
They might need the Russian bloke back. What's his name? Abramovich.
Abramovich, yes, indeed. NRL, too. We just got to quickly touch on that, too. It's just such an incredible season. West Tigers, what they score, 66, smashed the Cowboys, and they're on the bottom of the ladder, Jack. So that's a very even competition.
66 points is about 8 weeks a quota for the West Tigers, isn't it?
Well, they're no longer on the bottom. I think that now goes to the Dragons, who I think might have had a win on the weekend too. But the West Tigers, when you got the bottom side, just, the really sad thing about the AFL was the Eagles Hawthorn game at UTAS in Launceston, where the Hawks really beat them up. So that tells you your bottom side's just an easy beat. And but not now NRL. I keep saying this. Penrith are starting to find a little bit of form, but really form is very, very fleeting in the NRL at the moment.
Yep.
All right, well, that takes us to the end of the show. What do you got for us, Jack? Did Cats do any ironing on over the weekend?
I've got something before we go. It's from New York. Not all the bad ideas come from California. This one's from New York. They've got a lot of problems there with shoplifting. In fact, sort of semi-organised shoplifting, sort of looting. Really.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, it's organised stuff, mate. Yeah.
Well, there's 2 separate things going on. There's some just random looting and some organised shoplifting. Anyway, the New York Police Department have announced, and the New York City has announced a new crackdown, which includes giving first-time offenders intervention programs instead of prosecution, de-escalation training for retail employees. I think that means you don't belt the crap out of someone who's trying to steal stuff. Establishing neighbourhood retail watch groups to share information about a theft in real time with one another and the police, and installing kiosks in stores to connect would-be thieves with social service programs.
Oh, that's a terrific idea, Jack.
I think this is the peak of the underlying causes of crime argument, isn't it? Really, this is as good as it gets.
Well, we saw go. Sorry, go on.
The lieutenant commander in charge of detectives put it this way: so when people come in that we're just about to steal, they won't, because they realise that stealing is a source of a different problem for them. So they're going to use the kiosk to access social services. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
that's not going to happen.
We did touch on this a few weeks ago because the figures came out and there was a very high proportion of shoplifting had been committed by a very small number of people.
Yeah, about 30% of all the shoplifting. So that's 250 people who were arrested 2,500 times.
Yeah. And that would indicate to me that there is an organised, at least one and probably more organised rackets of shoplifting who are probably not going to be going, look, I'm supposed to knock off a certain number of Gantt shirts today, but I'll just pop into the kiosk and have a pie.
Well, no, I'll pop into the kiosk and sign up for some rehabilitation program provided by an NGO.
Yeah, they maybe have a foot long there as well too. So, yeah, no, look, we can just see some ideas that are just never going to make it, and that is one of them, just going to be a disaster. They've obviously got rackets going on there. And almost certainly the organised crime boys will be thereabouts, Jack. It's a time-honoured profession, professional shoplifting, Jack, and they're very, very good at it. Australians are very, very good at it, Jack. I don't know if you've ever heard about the kangaroo gang in the UK. Used to knock off jewellery stores and so forth. Just one time they brought in a woman who was wearing a long coat, took it off, nothing underneath. She was standing there naked. Pandemonium ensued while they just helped them, and while this enormous distraction was going on, they just helped themselves to the goodies on display in the store, and then left very quietly. Very smart boys, the kangaroo gang.
Yep.
All right, mate. Thank you very much for your time today. We've gone a little bit long. We do apologise for that, listeners, but we had so much to get through, and as usual, we just want to say. Like Lawrence Belcom, who dropped us a line during the week and wanted to correct me on Toyotas and so forth, please feel free to contribute towards the program and drop us a line. You can get Jack on Hong Kong Jack at substack.com. Correct me if that's wrong.
Yeah, you can. And you can find my letter to Stan Grant.
Oh, you've got a letter to Stan Grant in there. Good stuff. And you can get me on Jack the Insider or at Jack the Insider. My DMs are always open and often getting filled with young ladies wanting to flog me crypto, which is nice. But yes, we do look forward to you. And Ray, Baseman, we will next week look at your view that you've now sent to me on several occasions that the National Party is the cart leading the Liberal Party horse around. I think you might have something there, Ray. We're going to have a look at that for you next week. And thanks very much for all our listeners, and we'll speak to you next week. See ya.
Cheers.